Hi guys, hope you're all well. Just a reminder, if you have the time, to check out my second channel, Tales of Tragedy. There's a link in the description. Your support growing that channel and this one is greatly appreciated. Anyway, on with the video. On the 6th of June 2012, a 32-year-old woman called Claire Holland disappeared without a trace after leaving a pub in Bristol in the UK. Claire had many issues in her life that she was trying to overcome, including alcohol abuse, but she was working hard to reconnect with her 4 children, so her friends and family knew something must have happened, and as time progressed, it was clear she was dead. However, the case quickly went cold, but 7 years later, in 2019, police received the following 999 call.
I'm handing myself in.
Handing yourself in for what?
Yeah, it's murder, mate.
Pardon?
It's murder.
It's murder.
I just want this off my back. I feel so bad. I've had it for years on my head.
So what happened years ago?
Yeah.
What's your ex called?
Claire Holland.
The man speaking was Darren Osment, a violent domestic abuser and Claire's former partner, but he quickly withdrew his confession. However, due to diligent police work involving secret filming and an undercover operation, Claire Holland's killer would face justice a decade after she was last seen alive. Welcome to Evil Among Us. Claire Holland did not have an easy life. Born in 1980, her parents separated when she was young, and she spent her early years moving between their 2 properties. She was taken into care when she was around 16 years old, and by this point, she had already developed issues with drugs. In her new foster placement, she was introduced to alcohol, and this would lead to a battle which would last for the rest of her life. Claire was intelligent and did well in school, but her life quickly deteriorated, and by her 20s, she began relationships with other men who were also addicted to alcohol and who were violent. By 2008, when she was 28 years old, Claire had had 3 children, but all had been taken into care because she was unable to care for them due to her issues with alcohol. Claire had also become estranged from her family, including her mother, father, brother and sister. It seems this was for a number of reasons, none of which were because they didn't love Claire. Exactly the opposite. Her family tried to help her without success, and they had to put distance between themselves and her to safeguard their own well-being. Also, Claire appears to have cut ties with her family because she was ashamed of how her life had turned out and that she couldn't stop drinking. Also in 2008, she was working in a cafe in Bristol, a city in the southwest of England, when she met a man called Darren Osment. Unfortunately, Claire beginning a relationship with Osment would eventually cost her life. There's almost no information about Darren Osment's background. What we do know is that he was an alcoholic and was described by his own mother years later in court as a, quote, vile drunk. The police also reported after the court case that, quote, Osment is a selfish and violent misogynist who has abused almost everyone he's been close to. This included his own family, who despised him, and intimate partners, as he was a serial domestic abuser who would batter women for even the smallest infraction of his rules. He was also unable to take any responsibility for his own actions. To him, everyone else was at fault. The relationship between Claire and Osment was toxic, with each condoning the other's excessive use of alcohol. Things became worse when Claire became pregnant in 2010. Soon after giving birth to the pair's son, Osment threw Claire down the stairs. The police were called, and social services became involved. Claire told the social workers that she was terrified of Osment, and that he'd regularly strangled her in the past. She said she feared he would eventually kill her. Assessments were undertaken, and their son was taken into care. This was due to concerns with both parents, Claire because of her drinking, and Osment because of his drinking, but also his violence. The couple were informed of this, but in Osment's mind, Claire was the only one at fault. She was the reason their son had been taken into care. The beatings Claire was subjected to increased after this point. Claire was able to escape the relationship by the end of 2010, but her respite would be short-lived. By 2012, Claire had turned a corner. She'd moved into a new flat, which she was decorating, with the hopes that one day her children would be able to come and live with her. She was also trying to rebuild bridges with her family, and this included her father, David Holland. On the 6th of April 2012, she sent him a series of messages, which read, quote, "I'm sorry for the mess I've made of my life. I'm putting it right. Love my dad. Love my dad." Followed by a second one, which read, "Daddy, I'm not perfect, but love you." They had arranged to meet at the beginning of June 2012 to start to rebuild their relationship. Claire was still drinking, but had reduced her alcohol intake significantly and was enrolled in a program to combat her addiction. It appears that she'd also begun to see some of her children. This was supervised in a contact centre, but Claire didn't care. She just wanted to see them, and she never missed a visit. Before Claire disappeared, she was due to begin having contact with her 9-year-old daughter Rosie, from whom she'd been estranged since she was 4. They'd planned a contact session in early June 2012, and both were really excited. However, Claire would never get to meet her father or her daughter again. In late May 2012, arrangements had been made for the son she had with Darren Osment to move to Torquay in Devon to live with a relative of Claire's. It seems that this move was something that was arranged quickly, and neither party had a chance to say goodbye. It seems that this hit Claire quite hard, and she called Osment to speak to him about the situation. The pair had been in sporadic contact in the 2 years since their relationship ended. It's not explicitly clear if Osment was having contact with his son. It appears likely, although this was not when Claire was around. Claire then informed her sister about the fact that she'd arranged to meet Osment late on the night of Wednesday the 6th of June 2012, after he finished his shift working as a chef at the Richmond Public House on Gordon Road in Clifton. She spent the afternoon and early evening walking around Bristol town centre, which was captured on CCTV. Claire eventually ended up in the Seamus O'Donnell's pub on St Nicholas Street in Bristol city centre, where she drank before leaving at around 11:15 p.m. to make her way to meet Darren Osment at the pub where he worked. This was a walk which would have taken her around 25 minutes. Claire then disappeared. Claire's father and daughter turned up to the meetings they'd arranged, but Claire didn't show up. The family became concerned. No one could reach Claire on the phone, and no one had seen her. 3 days after her disappearance, Claire was reported as a missing person to Avon and Somerset Police. An investigation was launched, and Darren Osment was spoken to. He admitted he'd been due to meet Claire that evening, but said that she'd never shown up. There was no CCTV in the area covering the pub, and so Claire's last movements could not be traced. The police asked the public for help and interviewed anyone they could think of who may be able to give them a break in the case. Claire's family were convinced that she'd been the victim of foul play, as she turned a corner in her life and was much happier than they'd seen her in a long time, so she was very unlikely to throw away this progress, and especially the chance of regaining custody of her children, by simply vanishing of her own free will. The police were of the same opinion, and more so when, in the months after Claire's disappearance, there were no indicators that she'd taken any money out of her bank accounts, used social media, or travelled within the UK or out of the country. However, without any concrete proof or a body, the case quickly went cold. Claire's family were heartbroken. They feared they would never know the fate of their loved one. But 7 years later, a 999 call would change everything. In 2019, 7 years after Claire Holland had gone missing, the following 999 call was received.
I'm handing myself in.
Handing yourself in for what?
Yeah, it's murder, mate.
Pardon?
It's murder.
It's murder.
I just want this off my back. I feel so bad. I've had it for years on my head.
So it happened years ago?
Yeah.
What's your ex called?
Claire Holland.
Claire Holland?
Yeah. I basically arranged it, didn't I?
What, you arranged for her to be killed?
Well, you know, took the law into my own hands, basically. And, she took my son away from me, so I took that from her.
Took what from her?
Well, her life, really.
Police attended and came face to face with Darren Osment, Claire's former partner. He was extremely drunk, but was compliant and willingly went with the officers, who arrested him on suspicion of murder. On the scene he'd said, quote, "I've had enough of ducking and diving. Whatever is done is done. I just want to get it off my back, and I put my hands up. I've had enough now. Do you know what I mean? What will be, will be." He also claimed that he'd paid a hitman to kill Claire. However, when he sobered up in a police cell, he retracted his confession, claiming that he couldn't remember making the call to 999 because he was so drunk. He stated he had nothing to do with Claire's murder and gave no real explanation why he claimed to be a killer. I cover many cases on this channel which highlight police failings, but in this case, it was the diligent and exceptional work of detectives which meant that Claire Holland's family would finally get justice. So the police could have easily dismissed Osment's statements as the ravings of a drunk, but they looked into him closely. They found that Darren Osment was a violent alcoholic who, since Claire went missing, had victimised several other girlfriends, beating them all. Importantly, they also found reports which indicated that Osment had hinted to intimate partners, friends and family that he'd killed Claire. To one friend he said, quote, "I did kill her, you know. I did kill my ex. I killed her. I killed my ex. I threw it off into the river off Avonmouth Docks in Bristol. I strangled her." When asked why he'd done this, he replied, "No stupid bitch is going to keep me away from my child." To another friend, he said, quote, "I paid someone £500 to have the mother of my child executed." It was clear that Osment was giving different accounts to different people. As well as claiming he hired a hitman and strangled Claire, he told others that he'd stabbed her, they'd cut up her body and thrown it in the river. Whilst the method changed, the fact that he was admitted to killing Claire stayed the same. Officers from Avon and Somerset Police asked permission from the Chief Constable and the Investigatory Powers Commissioner's Office, which oversees covert operations, to send in an undercover officer. They took advice from a criminal psychologist and designed a cover story which the undercover officer practiced over and over again. And so Paddy O'Hara was born, a petty but violent criminal whose job it was to befriend Darren Osment to get information so that he could be brought to justice for the murder of Claire Holland. At the end of 2020, Paddy moved into a flat around 300 metres away from Osment's property in Patchway, just north of Bristol. Paddy approached Osment and, using the information that had been researched about him struggling to find work, offered him casual employment moving boxes of counterfeit stolen clothes. The relationship between the two men grew, helped by performances to reinforce that Paddy was a criminal, including on one occasion Paddy pretending to hide cash and silver medallions in the woods whilst Osment acted as a lookout. Paddy would also take him along on rides to sell cannabis to a man called Nick, also an undercover police officer. The men soon became firm friends, and Paddy would frequently visit Osment's flat, and the pair would play pool together, sometimes for 10 hours a day. Paddy began probing Osment's attitudes and his views in order to mirror him and gain his trust. At one point, they were discussing women having equal billing in sporting events, and this led to Osment going into a misogynistic rant and admitting that he'd pushed his ex down the stairs. Paddy also showed Osment a fake newspaper article about a murder in Belfast in the 1980s and claimed that he'd been involved. I assume the rationale was that a killer was more likely to open up to a fellow killer. Paddy saw firsthand the violent temper of Osment. He would fly off the handle at the slightest provocation, always threatening to maim or kill anyone who annoyed him. Paddy also saw him being violent towards his dog, assaulting bar staff and showing off weapons he collected. The pair often took long walks along the Severn estuary, with Osment implying that he'd thrown Claire's body into the water after killing her, with him saying that she had gone for a, quote, "nice fucking swimming lesson." By October 2021, Osment fully trusted Paddy, telling him that if he were going to get married, he would be his best man. He continued to open up about Claire, telling Paddy, quote, she ain't gonna be seeing the light of day again. Ironically, there were several occasions where Osment spoke to Paddy about his fears that the police were closing in on him, not realising he was telling this to an undercover officer. Osment would frequently mention Claire, always referring to her in derogatory terms, including calling her a fucking bitch. He seemed almost obsessed with her, even this many years later. He justified the killing by saying it was in response to, quote, what she did. Specifically, he told Paddy, "It makes me feel sick, but I did it for my child, because she harmed my fucking child, and how they were brought up is fucking wrong." So again, as he claimed to others before, he killed Claire because she was apparently responsible for this situation with their son. Whether this was the fact he'd been taken into care soon after his birth, or moved to Torquay just before her disappearance is unclear, but essentially, he was saying she deserved what happened to her. He indicated that he was struggling with the fact that he'd ended Claire's life, and the undercover officer reported back, quote, that Osment was both disgusted by and felt justification for his actions, and once was physically sick on seeing a televised police appeal for witnesses. I'm sceptical of placing too much weight on claims of Osment feeling remorse or guilt for his actions, but we'll come back to this later. On the 15th of June 2022, there was a breakthrough after Paddy urged Osment to open up in order to lessen the burden on his shoulders. He said, quote, "Daz, this is the problem, mate. You've never really talked to me. I think the fact you've been carrying this for so fucking long, mate, I think it's tearing you apart. I think I need to protect you. I know you fucking killed the bitch, but you've never told me about, like, any of the details." Osment was unaware that, like on every occasion the pair met, he was being recorded, and there was a hidden camera in the vehicle where this conversation took place. This captured Osment admitting to killing Claire and going into detail about what had happened. This is part of that video. I need to mention that it's almost impossible to hear what Osment is saying, so you have to read the subtitles. I'm not sure they're 100% accurate, as some don't make sense. This may be because he's pissed. I know how some of you have got visual impairments, and others possibly have me in their pocket listening to the video, so I'll read out the most relevant statements he makes after the clip. Someone else's mate. Yeah, man. Just trying to. Honestly, like I said, as far as I'm concerned, I don't think. And it, you know, right now, I don't want to. It's not that I don't want to talk to them. I just don't want to. I just want to. Not that. So it's not like I don't. It's not telling. I just want to forget about it. Because you know more than anybody knows. I know. You know. I hope it's not. I need to make sure. Because, you know what I mean? Put it this way. Life skills. The time it happened, there was a massive load of flood. And there was a load of people and it all come rushing down like they were like really much that stuff in and they I think it's all way all down as far as me I don't see it's not gonna come close up. It shouldn't, I don't know. So the most relevant statements Osment made are, quote, "You know, it is what it is. It's fucked. It's done. You know, as far as I'm concerned, I'm not fucked about it now. I mean, if there's anything that, for instance, you'd want to know, or consciously, specifically want to ask me, then ask me, and I would answer. When I assume he's asked about whether he still has the murder weapon, Osment says, "No, I fucking put that in someone else's knife box a long time ago." In response to a question I assume relates to how he disposed of Claire's body, he says, "Knife skills," then makes cutting gestures across his chest and stomach area, indicating dismemberment. He continues, "The time it happened, there was a massive load of floods. There was a load of fucking water all come rushing down, and I think it was all fucking gone. It's all fucking weighted. It's all down. As far as, I don't see. It's not going to come floating up. It shouldn't. I don't know." Other portions of the video that have not been released capture the continued back and forth between Paddy and Osment, in which he states that he lured Claire to the pub on the night of the 6th of June 2012, knowing there was no CCTV covering the area. He then said that he stabbed her with one of the knives that he used as a chef, before dismembering her and throwing her in the river. He said that he then burnt his bloody clothes and put the knife amongst another chef's equipment. A month after this confession, Paddy O'Hara disappeared as quickly as he'd appeared. He'd acquired 1,200 hours of footage, which contained no less than 16 confessions made by Darren Osment that he'd killed Claire Holland on the day she disappeared in 2012. In August 2022, Osment received a knock on the door and the police arrested him. Based on the evidence gathered, he was charged with murder and remanded into prison to await his fate. Police searched areas along the Severn Estuary for any signs of Claire's remains, but none were found. To this day, the location of her body is unknown. Despite Darren Osment's repeated confessions caught on camera, he pleaded not guilty to Claire Holland's murder, and so his trial began on the 16th of October 2023 at Bristol Crown Court. When confronted with the multiple confessions, Osment denied everything. He stated they were due to, quote, "drinking too much, trying to big myself up, make myself out to be something I'm not, the combination of the three." On the stand, Osment tried to present himself as a man who accepted that his son being taken into care was a good thing, and he even claimed that he was wrong to say this was solely due to Claire's drinking. However, the hours of footage played in court, where he repeatedly referred to his former partner in the most derogatory terms, showed who he really was, a violent, remorseless misogynist. The recorded confessions and the testimony from the myriad of people to whom Osment had confessed about the murder was the linchpin of the prosecution's case. There was no forensic evidence and, as I stated, no body. However, it was able to be proved that Claire was inevitably dead, not just because of what Osment had said, but the fact that her bank account had not been touched in 10 years. There were no indicators that she travelled anywhere, and no one had seen her in all that time. So whilst no remains had been recovered, there was also no proof of life. On the 11th of December 2023, at the end of a 2-month trial, Darren Osment was found guilty of the murder of Claire Holland. On the 20th of December, he stood before Mrs. Justice Cutts for sentencing. This was filmed, and I want to play this. It's 13 minutes long, so please feel free to skip forward to the next section if you want.
Darren Osment, for the moment you can remain seated. I am to sentence you today for the murder of Claire Holland. For this grave offence, there is only one sentence prescribed by law, and that is imprisonment for life. That is the sentence that I shall impose upon you in due course. However, I'm required to determine the minimum period you should serve in prison before you are eligible to be considered for release on parole. It's most important that you and everyone concerned with this case should understand what in fact this means. The minimum term is not a fixed term after which you will be automatically released, but the minimum time that you will spend in custody before your case can be considered by the parole board, and it will be for the parole board to say at that time whether or not you will be released. If they say you should not, you will remain in custody. If and when you are released, you will be subject to licence, and that will be the case for the rest of your life. If for any reason your licence were to be revoked, you would be recalled to prison to serve your life sentence in custody. Claire Holland was aged 32 years at the time of her death in June 2012. It is clear from the deeply moving impact statements that I have heard and read that she was a warm and vivacious person who was deeply loved. She had experienced difficulty in her early life, but by 2012 was, in the words of her mother, starting a new chapter in her life. She had a new flat, had re-engaged with her family, and was engaged on a programme to stop drinking. She was rightly proud of herself and the efforts that she was making. She had high hopes that she would in time be able to have her children to live with her, children whose contact visits she never missed, no matter how difficult her life was at times. She was happy and optimistic about the future. A fresh start was ahead of her. You robbed her of that fresh start. You robbed her of the future she deserved. You took her permanently from her supportive family who loved and cherished her. You took her from her children, all of whom, including your own son, have had to grow up without her presence and her love. They have understandably struggled to cope with her loss, but you have made their suffering so much worse in the way that you have behaved since her death. You must face the consequences of your actions in the punishment that I impose upon you today. I recognise that such punishment cannot bring her back, and those who love and cherish her must live forever with her loss. For 11 long years, no one except you knew what had happened to Claire. She went missing on the night of the 6th of June 2012, never contacting her family or her children again. There was an extensive police missing persons investigation which failed to find her. You were spoken to in the course of that investigation. You could and should have told the police what had happened. You could and should have admitted that you killed Claire. You did not. You left her family with the agony of not knowing where she was or what had happened. As you sought to move on with your life, you left her family in limbo, caring for her youngest child and trying to give him and her other children answers they did not have. Yet it is clear that you could not live with the burden of what you had done. I accept the prosecution case, that you were haunted by it, and seeking to relieve the burden of what you did, you have made confessions over the years to 6 people in all. Had you truly been remorseful, you would have told the police and faced the consequences of your crime. You did call them in Exeter in 2019, only then to retract the confession you made the following day. Then, as you always have done, you thought only about yourself. Throughout your confessions, you have sought to justify what you did, saying that no one took your son away from you, inferring that if they did, they would pay the consequences. You told the 999 operator in Exeter that Claire took your son away from you, and so you took that, meaning her life, away from her. This was a reference to the fact that the son you shared with Claire had been taken into care at approximately 1 month of age. In 2010, you had been in a relationship with Claire who became pregnant. That relationship was characterised by alcohol misuse by both of you and, I find, by violence on your part. As you conceded during the course of the trial, it was the right thing for your son that he was taken into care at that time, but you were wrong to say that was because of Claire. Let me make it clear to you. Both of you were responsible for the fact that he could not be cared for at home. You were both drinking. But rather than care for and help Claire look after him, rather than addressing your own issues with alcohol and helping her to address hers, you were critical of and violent to her. The police were called after, I find, you threw Claire down the stairs shortly after your son's birth. She was to tell social workers she was frightened of you. I accept her account given to them that you had strangled her in the past and that she feared you may kill her. This fits not just with your attitude to Claire, but with the evidence of your character that I heard during the trial. You are, in the words of your mother who gave evidence, a vile drunk. You are quick to temper and abusive and violent to women. Claire was on the receiving end of that violence. It was to her advantage that you separated not long after your son was taken into care in 2010. In the weeks leading up to the 6th of June 2012, arrangements were made for your son to move to Torquay to be cared for by a relative of Claire's. It seems that he was moved without either of you having a chance to say goodbye, and Claire wished to talk to you about that. She called you on the 6th of June, asking to meet. I'm satisfied on the evidence that you arranged to do so. Claire told her sister that she was to meet you after you had finished work. She said the same thing to others that she spent time with that afternoon. She was happy to be doing so. Such happiness was entirely misplaced. It is clear from your confessions and the verdict in this case that you did meet her that night, and when you did, you killed her. I consider, against the background of your explosive temper, that your confession to Daniel Lewis was correct in this regard, that you argued when you met after you finished work. She was vulnerable. It was late at night and she had been drinking. When you confessed to others that you killed Claire, you said to some that you strangled her, and to others that you paid for someone else to kill her. I am sure that you killed her yourself. You were living hand to mouth in a hostel and did not have the means to pay someone else to do it. By so saying, you were seeking only to distance yourself from the horror of what you had done by inserting another mystery person into the picture. I have said that you could have told the police in 2012 what you had done. You could have done so over the years that followed. You could and should have told them and Claire's family what you did with her body. In your cowardice, you have never done so. You have shown not a shred of remorse. Rather, you spoke, in an effort to justify what you had done, about Claire in the most derogatory terms, blaming her for your actions. Her family have had to listen during the trial to what you said about her to the undercover officer who was deployed to find out what happened to Claire, never referring to her by her name, or even as your ex-partner or your son's mother, only by words of abuse and scorn. In your confessions, you have said more than once that Claire's body could never be found. At times, you have talked about her body being in pieces and suggested that you cut it up. I am sure on the evidence that you were responsible for the dismembering and disposal of Claire's body, and, given your reaction around water, that you disposed of her body in the water. For Claire's family's sake, and for the sake of your son, I urge you for once to stand up to what you have done in the very near future, and to disclose what you did and where her body might be found, so that she may be laid to rest. I turn to your sentence. In coming to the appropriate minimum term, I must first decide where this case falls within Schedule 21 to the Sentencing Act 2020. There are no factors which would place this case within paragraphs 2 or 3 of the schedule. I have considered whether this was a murder committed with a knife taken to the scene. There is insufficient evidence for me to say that was the case. Given what you have said in some of your confessions and your predilection to strangulation, I consider it more likely that was the means of Claire's death. I conclude, therefore, that the appropriate starting point for the minimum term is one of 15 years' imprisonment. The offence is seriously aggravated by the dismemberment and concealment of Claire's body. I consider the domestic violence in your relationship with Claire, particularly your earlier strangulation of her, to also be an aggravating factor. Whilst I am sure that you arranged to meet Claire on the night of her death, there is insufficient evidence for me to conclude that there was a significant degree of planning or premeditation in what you did. I consider it more likely that you killed her in temper. I find, however, no evidence that at the time you killed her, you did not intend so to do. I find no mitigation. I recognise that you have no convictions for violence, but this has little consequence, given the evidence I heard during the trial of your violence towards Claire and indeed in a subsequent relationship. Whilst I do not increase your sentence by reason of your violence to others, I find no mitigation in your lack of convictions for violence. I heard a great deal of psychiatric and psychological evidence during the trial. You do not suffer from a major mental illness, neurodevelopmental disorder, or significant personality disorder. You do suffer from alcohol dependency disorder with associated depression and anxiety. I accept that over the years this has led you on occasion to experience suicidal thoughts. It provides, however, no possible mitigation in this case. You have been offered help with your alcohol misuse on many occasions. You have not availed yourself of that help. I take into account all that your counsel has ably said on your behalf. You are now aged 41 years. I recognise that your conduct and your sentence will have an impact upon your own family. You will have little contact with your own children as they grow into adulthood. They grow up without a father. It is often the case, of course, that others suffer from the conduct of those who offend. They grow up without a father by reason of your actions. As I have said, the sentence is one of life imprisonment. In coming to the minimum term, I step back to look at the total sentence to ensure that it reflects the overall seriousness of the offence. Taking into account all the aggravating and mitigating factors as exist, in my judgment, the minimum term I impose is one of 20 years imprisonment. Stand up. Darren Osment, for the murder of Claire Holland, I sentence you to life imprisonment. You will serve a minimum term of 20 years, less the 503 days you have served on remand. Thereafter, it will be for the parole board to decide when, if ever, you should be released. If you are ever released, you will remain on licence for the rest of your life. Take him down.
So, for clarification, Darren Osment was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum tariff of 20 years to serve before he can apply for parole. As one last act of defiance, Osment held up a sign saying innocent as he was led down to the cells to start his sentence. Outside the court, Sarah Holland, Claire's sister, gave the following powerful statement on behalf of the family.
Claire Holland has been missing from our lives since the 6th of June 2012. She had been looking forward to the future. Her sudden disappearance caused tremendous sadness, confusion and worry. We spent more than a decade waiting to find out what happened to her. Frequently, one of us would think that we had seen her in public, rush to catch up, only to be disappointed to see that it was someone else. The pain of not having her in our lives, indescribable. We will forever miss her happy, warm and fun personality. She loved her children wholeheartedly, and they will always love her. She would have continued to live a meaningful life with the support of her family. Instead, she has been denied the right to live. She has missed numerous significant family events, including seeing her grandchildren being brought into the world, or sharing the last moments with others who have passed away. During the trial, we have been sickened to hear how Claire's life was cruelly taken from us. Her death was totally senseless and completely unjustified. We have learned how one person called 999 in the summer of 2019 and confessed to having her killed. The same person retracted this very next day and then continually denied being responsible for ending her life. We have listened to weeks of painful evidence. Claire's character was openly attacked, yet she was not there to defend herself. During the evidence, we had to sit silently while hearing how the same person had used the most vile and obscene language to describe her. Despite all this, we still do not know the full details of what happened to Claire. Her body has never been found. The person who took her life has continued to cause us agony. We continue to suffer because of this failure to tell us about Claire's final moments and where she went. We have been denied this basic justice. Her death is indefensible. We have been haunted by not being able to see her one final time. She deserves to be given a place to rest where we can honour and respect her memory. We would like to thank all the witnesses who courageously came to court and gave evidence. Without them, we would not have been able to get justice for Claire. We would also like to thank everybody who has helped search for Claire during the years since she went missing and those who investigated this case. We also extend our thanks to everyone who has helped our family to confront and cope with the loss of Claire.
However, the most heartbreaking statements have come from Rosie, the daughter that Claire was meant to meet up with a few days after her disappearance. In a news article from December 2023, she described looking for her mum in the faces of strangers in the street and blaming herself for her disappearance, stating, quote, "It made me think, if I was there, if I never got taken when I was 4, she could still be here and I could be ringing her up." Rosie became involved in competitive running and football, and for years she would hope that her mother would suddenly turn up at these events. She also reported, quote, "Every goal that I scored or every running race that I won, it was always for her. I knew one day, if she came back, I could be like, I've done all this for you. I hope you're proud of me." Finally, she said that not being able to say the word mum is heartbreaking. The family of Claire Holland still have no peace. Her body has never been found. They haven't had the chance to say goodbye. All because the monster, that is Darren Osment, murdered Claire and now refuses to disclose where he dumped her like rubbish. Darren Osment is a truly evil man, but I also find his case quite interesting. There seem to be contradictions that I need your help resolving, and whilst I'll present my opinion, I welcome your thoughts. So the main issue is whether this man felt guilt or remorse for his actions. The undercover officer seemed to indicate that he wrestled with the fact that he murdered Claire Holland, but then in court he was described as a man without remorse. I think that he did feel some guilt, but this was a tiny feeling in the back of his mind. The majority of his concern was not guilt, but concern that he would get a knock on the door and have to face justice. Looking at the monster that he is, he's a classic domestic abuser, someone who uses violence to impose his will on his partners. With him, any act of defiance was met with force, including being thrown down the stairs and repeatedly being strangled. However, he was also a man who took no responsibility for his actions. He would also beat his partners if something happened which was fully, or at least partially, his fault, because he could do no wrong. He is one of those horrific cases of a man, and I use that term loosely, who was likely dependent on relationships and couldn't exist outside of one, but who also hated women and would treat them like shit, and when they left him, he would shrug his shoulders and say, "See, all women are bitches," rather than look at the monster that he was. I find it interesting that Osment told at least one previous girlfriend that he killed Claire. In my opinion, he didn't say this out of guilt. This was a tactic, his way of controlling women. Behave, or you'll end up like Claire. Also, as Osment said in court, he clearly told other people to brag, to be the big man, rather than the pathetic specimen that he is. That doesn't seem like guilt or remorse to me. He's also one of those despicable domestic abusers who claims that their behaviour is motivated by concern for their children. As I've outlined in other videos, domestic abusers will use their children in the most horrific ways in order to torment their victim. They'll use contact after the breakup in order to gather information, but also to try and turn their children against their mother. In the most serious cases, abusers will murder the children and then kill themselves as the ultimate fuck you to their ex-partner. Darren Osment framed the murder of Claire as somehow being justified because their son was taken into care. So he did this for him? So him robbing his son of his mother was a good thing? Absolute bollocks. He clearly didn't care about his son when he was throwing his mother down the stairs or strangling her, likely in front of him. I don't believe in any way, shape or form that anything that Darren Osment has ever done in his whole life has been due to concern for anyone but himself. He abused everyone in his life for his own ends. I think that their son being taken into care was relevant, but not in the way that he tried to present. I believe that losing their son to him was another stick to beat Claire with, another sign of how useless she was, an excuse to further abuse her, nothing more. I would be curious how much contact he actually bothered to maintain with the son he claimed to care about over the years. This brings us to the murder. What happened we'll never know, but I think there was likely an argument, potentially about their son, or it could have been about anything. However, the key thing is that Claire likely said or did something which made Osment feel disrespected or insignificant, holding up a mirror to the pathetic man that he is. Claire was in a far better place in her own life, and maybe this made her feel more confident in confronting her former partner. And so, as punishment for defying him, for making him feel small, he killed her. Nothing to do with their son. Where and how he killed her, what happened to her body is unclear. He told a number of stories, but I do think the judge got it wrong. I don't believe that Osment stabbed Claire and then dismembered her. I think, given his previous behaviour, he likely strangled her and then buried her body somewhere. I think his story of butchering Claire was part of him trying to seem like the big man, a dangerous criminal, someone no one should cross. However, we'll likely never know, because Darren Osment refuses to tell anyone where Claire's remains are. This is his last form of control. This brings me back to the question of remorse. As I said at the beginning of this section, I think there was some guilt buried deep inside Osment, but this only came to the surface when he'd been drinking, hence his call in 2019. But when he was sober, there was nothing. The tiny bit of regret he had for ending another person's life was buried deep inside of him, and he was happy to brag about his crime and use it to control other people and to act like some sort of gangster. I think that Osmond's main concern was getting caught. He knew the police were circling and feared there would be a knock on the door any day, and he was tormented by the idea of spending decades of his life in prison. This fear far outweighed any regret. Also, a man who felt remorse would have taken responsibility for his actions at court, as well as giving Claire's family, including his own son, answers and the location of her remains so they could say a proper goodbye. He would have confessed at any point in the decade before he was caught, and he also wouldn't be appealing his sentence, which in my opinion should have been far higher. He would take his punishment and serve his time, but this isn't Darren Osment. He's a sad little man, a murderer, a domestic abuser, a misogynist who poses danger to women and will inevitably do so for the rest of his life. I hope he spends far more than 20 years in prison and is only released when he tells the authorities where Claire's body is. I also hope that the little kernel of guilt or remorse grows and eats away at him over the years. It's the least he deserves. So, what's your thoughts on this case? If you like the content, then consider becoming a channel member by clicking the join button. You can also send a one-off donation to support the channel using the thanks button. Please like, share and subscribe. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.